Let's see. We got some new people. Oh, no, Julie, you were here yesterday. Hi, good to see you again. And who else we got here? Yajama Hey Yoga. Hey there, Yvonne. How you doing? Can't hear a thing, but that's okay. You're looking marvelous.
Oh, right. Forgot everybody's muted.
All right, so everyone's muted intentionally. It's her fault. She did it. She muted you all. So don't blame me. Okay, so here we go. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine. For those of you who may not have attended Gita Wisdom programs before, that's a traditional way of starting such a gathering with a prayer to the Guru, to the spiritual master. My spiritual master's name is His Divine Grace E.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, known to students and admirers by his titular nickname, Prabhupada. Prabhupada, one at whose feet, Pada, others gather to hear from the Prabhu, from the master. We're using his edition of Isopanishad for this series. Half hour, not too painful, just a little bit of transcendental knowledge to end off the day. So without further ado, let's get started. There was one question yesterday that didn't get answered, and I promised that if there were questions, we would start off the following day's session with that. So the question was, are these texts not mythological? And if so, how can they have, I'm paraphrasing, relevance, practical relevance, if the stories described in the Sanskrit texts are myth? And the best way I can answer that would be to say that there's myth in the sense of something invented, a story that is not true, a literary vehicle for projecting some good messages out into the world. And then there's myth in the sense of mythos or mystery, which is something that is true, but on such a fundamental level that it rises above everyday reality to the level of metaphor, to the level of something that has universal application. And that kind of myth has a life of its own, quite separate and apart from whatever literary content it may be providing. So we'll talk more about that when we get to the creation story in the Puranas. Let me just switch over to our PowerPoint here. Narada is an excellent teacher, by the way, for this kind of stuff. There we go. Can you all see that? Okay. So this is the edition of Isopanishad that we are using. It was translated and commented by Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, my teacher. Initially, before he even left India, this was one of his earliest literary works, the translation and commenting of this text. It started off as a series of articles in his magazine. Back in 1944, the war was still on, and paper was in scarce supply, but Bhaktivedanta Swami, or Swamiji as he was known then, managed to convince the Indian government to sell him paper. And he came out with a monthly newspaper called Back to Godhead. His edition of Isopanishad appeared in a series of articles in that Back to Godhead newspaper or magazine or broadside. It was a rather large printed sheet. And then it was compiled into this book form after he came to America. So let me just recap for you a little bit about what we discussed yesterday, and I'll start with some announcements. As always, welcome. Those of you who are here for the first time, boy, did you miss some fun yesterday. But we do have these sessions recorded, and they are uploaded to our Facebook page, Gita Wisdom Teachings. So you'll find the recordings there. They're also available on YouTube if you do a search for Gita Wisdom and then my name, Joshua Green. Please keep your mic muted, and if you have a question, type it into the chat box, or simply type, I have a question, and then I'll know to call on you. If you don't have a copy of Isopanishad, it's available at vedabase.io, vedabase, vedabase.io. You'll find a download there. We're scheduling this for about 3 weeks of half-hour sessions in the evening. Could run longer depending on how tolerant you are of the jokes. If there isn't enough time to have all of the questions answered, we'll do the same thing tomorrow, namely answer whatever leftover questions there are then. So the bottom line yesterday was that we discussed different ways of knowing anything. Epistemology is the technical word for the study of knowledge. And we talked about 3 kinds of ways of knowing. One is through direct sensory evidence, what our senses perceive, what we can see. Seeing is believing. The second is theoretical knowledge or deductive reasoning. And the third is the Vedic process known as Shruti Praman, or receiving knowledge from sound that originates prior to material creation. Isopanishad is part of that library of transcendent sound that is known as Shruti. The Sanskrit texts are divided into 2 general categories, Shruti and Smriti. Shruti being the equivalent in the Hebrew tradition of Torah, the word of God directly enunciated, and Talmud or commentaries would be the Smriti. That is to say, that which is snu, that is which is remembered and therefore commented over the generations by great sages and teachers. Let me go to the next slide here. Yeah, here's the invocation, and I'll chant it once. You're welcome to chant along with me. You'll notice that today I put up the transliterated verse with the Sanskrit diacritics. And those of you who have studied some Sanskrit know that the dot has a particular effect on pronunciation. The long mark over a letter has a particular effect. A dot under an H has yet another effect. So this first line, for example, Om, that dot over the M makes it almost into an NG. Om, it's a kind of a stopple at the back of the throat. Om. Purnam, the long accent over the U, is a pur, so it's an extended U. The dot under the N in this case really doesn't change the pronunciation at all. However, in the next word, ada, the dot under the H makes it a full stop. It almost sounds like a K, so it's ada. Almost just stopping yourself before pronouncing a K sound. So, Om Purnam ada, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnam Udachyate, Purnasya Purnam Adhaya, the line over an A makes a long A sound. So instead of A, which is the third A in the word Adhaya, the first 2 A's are Adhaya. And then the last name, Purnam Evav Vashishyate, the acute accent over the S or the dot under the S transforms the S into a Sh sound. So again, speaking the verse, it sounds like this. Om Purnamadak Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate. And there's a simple melody that goes with this. Om Purnam Hadak Purnam Hidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. We can try that once more all together. Om Purnamadak Purnam Hidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Wonderful. Dress in yellow because tomorrow we're taking this on the road. Here's a list of the synonyms. You'll find this also in the Veda-based version of Isopanishad. But just going through this with you quickly, just to get a sense of the vocabulary in the translation that we'll read after. The word Om, often translated as the supreme source of everything, it is often spelled also as A-U-M, which is the three parts of creation, the A representing the supreme being, the U literally representing you, the minute finite jiva entity, and the M representing the loving bhakti devotional relationship that binds the two together. So Aum, spelt in this verse as O-M or Om, the complete whole. Purnam, perfectly complete. Purnam means everything is included there. Adak, that, Purnam, perfectly complete. Idam, this material world, here, the world that we can perceive with our senses. Purnat, from the all-perfect, coming from Purnam. Again, Purnam, complete unit. Udachyate is produced. This world, the phenomenal world that we can perceive with our senses, is produced by that complete whole. Purnasya, because it is of that complete whole, Purnam, everything complete therein, adaya, having been taken away. If you take away from something that is perfect and complete, Purnam, that complete balance is what? Eva, it's even. Avasishyate, what remains is also complete. Let's follow that in the translation. The personality of Godhead. Now, this is Prabhupada's way of translating Om into English, because in the Bhakti school, his name was Bhakti Vedanta, he represents the knowledge of devotion. The source of creation is sentient. The source of creation is not inert, lifeless, impersonal energy. The source of creation has form, distinction, unique personality, an individual separate from the creation emanating from him. Now, by the way, that's a him and her. One of the things that attracted me to the Bhakti school is that it envisions God in both female and male form. We'll have a discussion about that maybe tomorrow. The personality of Godhead, Om, the source of everything, is perfect and complete. What's the word for perfect and complete? Purnam. And because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this material, phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. The art is a reflection of the artist, the creation a reflection of the creator. Whatever is produced of the complete whole is complete in itself. Because he is the complete whole, even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains the complete balance. So we're going to get into an explanation of what this verse means. But here is just to situate the Sri Isopanishad into the context of the library of the Vedas. I put this slide up for your consideration. The Vedic text, the word Veda itself means knowledge. It's Sanskrit for knowledge. And the word for Sanskrit, in Sanskrit, is Devanagari, meaning the Devas, the Nagari, the language of the Devas, the language that is spoken on higher worlds in the eternal realm. Sanskrit does not have a material origin according to the tradition. It is a language that predates material creation. And therefore, the verses and hymns and mantras and prayers composed in Sanskrit have this effect on consciousness. You can't have that same effect with a word or phrase or sound that originates within material creation, because consciousness is transcendent. It is not material. To stimulate consciousness, you need a sound, some provocation that comes from that same realm as consciousness. So the Devanagari text is the language of these mantras. The division of these original Vedic texts is as follows: Samhitas or hymns. There are 4 of them: Rig, Sama, Yajur, and Atharva. George Harrison had a problem remembering these 4 names in Sanskrit, so He used to say the four barbers, Rick, Sam, Arthur, and I forgot what he said for Arthur. Anyway, four material names. The brahmanas are instructions for sacrifice. Remember, there was a time, believe this or not, when there were no malls. There was no internet. There was no online culture. Life was village-oriented, tribe-oriented, and the main way for connecting with the Supreme was not, as it is today, engaging in community service, engaging in something that will uplift the world. There was no sense of the world per se in these ancient Vedic times. Life was lived quite locally. In fact, the universe of someone living in the Vedic ages, we're talking now 5,000 years and prior to that, was the distance you could travel one day in a bullock cart. That circumscribed the universe of your particular village or tribe or community. So sacrifice was a very important function of daily life. It might be the Agnihotra Yajna, or sometimes called Homa, where there would be a fire pit built according to very strict rules of the Shastras or scriptures, where there would be powdered dyes that would form a particular kind of mandala on the earthen pit of the sacrifice. There would be fire lit without matches. The fire would be lit just by the recitation of mantra, and the fire would burst out from the sacrificial pit. Anyway, lots of instructions in the Brahmanas for that. The Aranyakas, treatise for forest dwellers. To be spiritual in the olden days, in the Vedic times, meant going away from the world, going into the forest, going into the mountains, going into the caves, and living off of what you could collect from nature. There was this wonderful harmony, this symmetry between living in the forest, living in the mountains, and nature reciprocating with your desire to be completely removed from anything that will distract you from your spiritual practice, from your yoga. That's not true today, except under the current conditions. Actually, there's a little bit of that kind of forest dwelling where we are in a retreat setting. But in those days, there was need for guidelines, how to create the proper food, how to create dwellings, and so on. And the part of the Vedas that interests us in this series, the Upanishads, the Upanishada, the Upa, coming closer to Isha, the Supreme Being. You might call this the headline of the Vedas, or the essential philosophical messages of the Vedic texts. So there's a little bit of the sense of where Isopanishad is situated in the library of the Sanskrit texts. There's another reason why we're having these introductory discussions about Isopanishad, and that is that in order to understand the message in these 18 verses, it's a very short text, it's only 18 verses, but in order to understand the message of those verses, we have to have a little bit of a sense of what the context is. Meaning, what were the assumptions that the compilers of these sacred wisdom texts made with regard to what their audiences already understood? So, for instance, if your desire is to be a doctor, you can't just go and start practicing surgery. There are some basics that you have to learn. Once you've mastered those basics, the higher studies will likely not go back and repeat what you have learned in the early stages of your training and education. For example, in the higher levels of medical practice, you're not necessarily going to hear a lot of reference to basic anatomy. You're not going to be referred back to the basics of blood types and so on. It's understood that you've already mastered that level of understanding. So the same is true in the Vedic texts. The texts assume that if you're now at a point where you can read and study and recite an elevated text like Isopanishad, there are certain basic things that you've already understood. So I'm attempting to give you some of the context that will allow us to go into the verses of the Isopanishad and understand their meaning within that framework. For example, one of the assumptions by the compilers of the Upanishads was that their audience would have understood that this world around us is not all in all. If you look at this illustration on the screen, what you see is the standard model of cosmological physics. The standard model says that there was a moment in cosmic history, going back 13 billion years or whatever the number is currently, when the universe first came into being from what is called a singularity, that there was a moment of origin to creation. Why this singularity existed or how it got triggered into exploding and pushing elements outward, we don't really know, nor will it be possible for us to go back in time to experience directly what that moment of singularity was all about. All that we can do is theorize as to how it happened and why it happened. The compilers of the Vedas had as their framework for wisdom an understanding that prior to the moment that you see on the left side of your screen, that singularity or sometimes Big Bang moment, when some infinitesimal point exploded in this cataclysmic movement of energy and heat and elements away, outward in all directions simultaneously. What was it that triggered that moment? That we'll never know. The compilers of the Vedas suggest that there was something prior to that moment. That moment prior to the introduction of time and matter, birth and death, things that have a beginning and a middle and an end, which is what typifies everything within the material world. That place prior to the moment of material creation must be the antithesis of what's occurring within the material world. So that if the material world began in darkness, that realm prior to the singularity of creation must be filled with light. If the material universe is characterized by not knowing, by an uncertainty about who we are, what the world around us is all about, that place prior to creation must be one of knowledge and fulfillment of self-awareness. If this universe is filled with the kleshas of birth, old age, disease, death, different kinds of material pangs, that environment prior to the creation of the universe must be one of joy, of ananda, of bliss, of complete fulfillment. Now, here's where things get a little bit tricky. By using that same logic, if everything within this material creation is defined by differentiation, by one thing being different from another, if it is defined by separateness, one person separate from another, if it's defined by unique individuality of things, then that place of origin must be defined by a unity, a oneness of all things, which would negate all separation between elements and created beings. Well, there's some truth to that, but because the logic itself is imperfect and incomplete, there's an element missing there. And that is that there can be a unity that includes individuality, that includes an irreducible personhood to the source of all emanations. That personhood cannot be understood just by material logic. So something of that universe that existed prior to material creation can be understood by our rational thinking, by comparing if this is the way things are here, the way things are there must be very different. But that will only take us so far. And at that point, where we run up against the limitations of our own intellectual and rational thinking, we have to go to some other place to understand the nature of ultimate reality. And that other place is your yoga. That other place is your meditation. That other place is your contemplative practices. Instead of going farther out into the manifest creation in order to understand its purpose and the nature of its origin, we turn that attention inward. And it is within the heart that we can actually understand ultimate reality. So we're moving our exploration, our journey into knowledge of selfhood from the outside to the inside, from the exoteric, if you will, to the esoteric, from the place of material logical calculation to a place of experiential depth, ultimately leading to a place of devotion, of bhakti. All right, so hold your questions just for another couple of minutes. Just want to come full circle with this brief exploration into creation. The material physical calculation is that that moment of existence must have been silent because there was no space through which sound could travel. This is a point of distinction as well with the Vedic explanation. The Vedic explanation is that the original element of creation, the thing that put creation moving forward, was sound, Shabda Brahma, and the sound was Om. Let me show you this last slide, then we're going to get into some Q&A. And remember, if you have questions, just put it into the chat box and I'll read it or call on you. The Puranic description of what science calls 0 plus 1, that moment of creation and everything that flowed from there, is that there was originally sound, the Omkara mantra. From sound, space was generated. From space, the element of air emerged. From air, fire was generated. From fire, water. And from water, earth. So there's from the subtle elements to the gross elements. And then once the elements of the universe were in place, life was able to emerge. So that's going to be that's the formal part of our chat here. All right, there we go. Hello again. We have a question from Mary. How is time referred to in the Vedas? Minutes, months, years, etc. Very good. The Sanskrit word for time is kala. Time, as it is envisioned in the material context, is linear. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. Time in the Vedic context is a circular cycle, just like the seasons. We are in, particularly right now, the middle era of the Manvantara avatar. I won't go into all the descriptions here, but it's essentially the middle point of the middle time frame of a middle creation. This age, which is called Kali Yuga, lasts for approximately 432,000 years. We're about 5,000 years into this part of our cycle of 4 yugas. At the end of Kali Yuga, things will have reached a point where no further spiritual progress will be possible. Things will then revert to their natural state, and a new golden age, or Satya Yuga, will begin. From Satya Yuga, which lasts a very long time, I think 1.2 million years, at which point there is a slight deterioration into Treta Yuga, which lasts, I think, 800,000 years, and then into Dvapara Yuga, which is the one just prior to Kali, and the one we are in now, Kali Yuga. 8 million, what is the total number of years in a Yuga cycle? Don't remember the exact total number of years. We are in the lower end of the cyclical ages, where things are rather desperate. It wasn't always like this. In other ages, life was longer, conditions were healthier, people were happier, and there was a much greater sense of the purposefulness of life. So we're struggling in Kali Yuga right now, but it's cyclical, and it will again revert back to a golden era, 432,000 years from now, 428,000 years. It's recommended that you not wait around, by the way. Things are going to get worse before they get better. the bhakti system is so beautiful. You can actually achieve full moksha in this one lifetime. You don't have to wait for a new Satya Yuga. So we'll thank you. It's a wonderful question. We'll get into more discussion about the nature of time in future classes. One last question here. Oh, Carly sent us a breakdown. Satya Yuga, 48,000 years. Well, I can't do the math just now, but thank you, Carly. Ananda Vilas Prabhu asks, if we originate from the complete, purnam, are we complete or incomplete? Aha. We are complete. We think we're incomplete. We're in a state right now of what is known as conditioned life or Maya, where the assumption is that we are born and we will die. Actually, that's not the case. And the yoga process is for lifting consciousness of ourselves to a place where we know that we are eternal beings, purnam, because we are also units emanating from the complete whole. Each of us is in ourselves complete, perfect, beautiful, invincible. Nothing and no one can hurt you. That's a nice way to wake up in the morning, remembering that you are purnam. Thank you, Ananda Vilas Prabhu. Yadunath, we have time? We have time for another question or two? We're running over a minute or two. I promised you I would keep this to a half hour. I'm going to try to do that. But one last question here from Yadunath and Ekanta Bhakta. Would you connect the dots as to why, if there's darkness here, there necessarily must be brightness there? We will start class with that one tomorrow. There's an inducement for you to come back. Thank you for a wonderful question. Thank you for your company. I wish you a wonderful evening. Please join me, if you would, in the Vaishnav Pranam. Vanchakalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Thank you all so much. See you tomorrow. Bye.